Okay, in this video, this is for task sheet 3001. So on that particular task sheet, it wants you to replace a diaphragm in a spring brake, or in a air brake chamber, sorry. So in an air brake chamber. So this is an air brake chamber, as we've covered in some previous videos. It takes air pressure. When you apply the brake, air pressure comes in this hose, acts on a diaphragm in here, moves this rod coming out, moves the slack adjuster, which rotates an S-cam to apply the brakes. We'll get to all those components later, but for this video, we're just shooting how to change out the diaphragm. Now I apologize because I have to do two different brake boards, and some of this I had to kind of get creative with because trying to hold the video camera and do something that generally requires two hands is a little difficult. So anyway, we're going to get through it though. So first thing you need to do, now this is a front brake chamber that I have you do. So it's just a single chamber. We'll get to the double chamber later because there's a lot more safety things involved with it. But this is just a service brake chamber, so it's just for the brakes when you step on the pedal. Okay, the slack adjuster is your adjustment mechanism for the brakes. It's also gives you leverage to multiply the output of here. But what we're dealing with on this particular job is the adjustment part of it. So I need to kind of move this slack adjuster away from this brake chamber to give me some room to work to take a brake chamber apart. Now, there's different kinds of slack adjusters, but this is the most common one we have in our shop. Okay. Now up here on the top of the slack adjuster, or the bottom, depending on how it's mounted on the truck, here it'll be down or up, but there's a square drive up here. This square drive rotates and adjusts the brakes. Okay. Now this is an automatic slack adjuster, so it will only rotate in one direction as it sits currently. So I'm going to put this tool, it's an 8-point tool because that's a 4-point, so that's kind of the way they do that. This is not like a normal open-end wrench, so you cannot use that on this square drive, or I said open-end. Boxed-in wrench, you can use an open-end, but it'd be a really small wrench and you don't have much leverage, so this is the actual tool to adjust it. So if you put that on this, it does not want to go forward. If I reverse this, now I can rotate it. What that tells me is this direction is tightening the brakes up, and since I need to back them off, I know the initial way I was going was right, although this won't rotate because we have to have a mechanism that only allows it to adjust itself tighter and not looser so that it won't back itself off and make the brakes not work. Okay, so we have a little pawl, P-A-W-L, on here that is a angled mechanism, kind of like the plunger on a door. It hits a striker plate, one side it's angled so it'll push itself in and the door will shut, but you have to turn the handle to open the door because it's flat on one side, angled on the other. That's the way this is. When we do slack adjusters, we'll take it apart and it'll make more sense, but to back the brakes off, I have to take this tool, put it under that, and when I push that in all the way, it pulls this outside piece out and removes that little angled teeth away from that. So now I can back that off. So as I back the brakes off, this clevis on the push rod here will come away from the chamber and give me some room to pull this out and lock it down. And I'll explain why we do that over on this next board. So just remember, that's how we adjust it. When we're completely done with the job, we would have to adjust the brakes back. So we would remove this tool, where this will only go one way, which is tightening the brakes up. We adjust them until the shoes are all the way out against the drum, so the direction it will turn. Reinstall this tool, back this off 1/4 of a turn, and it puts you right at the proper clearance between your brake shoes and the drum. Now, on this other board, I've already taken the clamp off of this. Our chamber has this band that holds it together. So there's a carriage bolt and the nuts and 9/16. Some of them have two. Some of them just have one and a angled piece that connects it together on the other side. A lot of the late model ones just have a solid band. You have to replace the whole thing. The reason I don't like replacing the whole chamber with a new one, because that is an option, this rod is very long, like that long, and it's got to be cut down to the proper length. So by doing it this way, we're just changing out the diaphragm that's inside here and fixing the air leak problem. The reason you'd be doing the diaphragm is you have too much air leaking on the brakes. So we have air pressure on the back side of this coming in. We've got a rubber diaphragm we're going to see when we take it apart in the middle. This other side is open to the atmosphere. The rod is on this side that comes out when the brakes are applied, and it has some little holes around here. These little holes are to let any moisture, water, any air that gets through the diaphragm because it's leaking come out. So if a truck won't pass inspection because the brakes won't hold air pressure like they're supposed to when they're applied, you have leaks. If you hear air coming out these little holes, then the diaphragm inside here has a hole in it. So to replace the diaphragm, we backed this brake off so that I could take a pry bar and pull this out, or you may be able to just use your hand. It's not a really strong spring, and lock some vice grips on here that will make this a lot easier to put back together. The book may not tell you to do that, but this is one of those handy things that mechanics have figured out over the years, so some of that knowledge that you need to know. Pull that out a good inch farther than normal at least, and lock some vice grips on there on the shaft, and that will help you with putting it back together, and I'll explain why in just a minute. I've already removed the band off of this one because I couldn't do all that and hold the camera. So once you take that off, this part that is inside here is the diaphragm. So this is the part that seals air off on this back side here. When air is applied on that diaphragm, if you have 100 pounds per square inch brake application, on this particular one, it says type 16 right there. The chamber itself says type 16 on the band, and on this metal part here as well, it'll say type 16. What that means is there's 16 square inches of area on this diaphragm. So if you put 100 psi into it, that's pounds per square inch, and if you have 16 square inches, that's going to multiply that 100 times 16. So you're going to wind up with 1,600 pounds of pressure coming out of this chamber to apply the brake. So this multiplies the pressure that you put into it because of the area. So it's a type 16. More common is a type 20 on the front, type 30 on the rear axles of the truck, and the trailer is normally a type 30, but there are some other ones too that's specialty, so always make sure that the diaphragm you get says the same type, and the size will indicate that it is that, so just match them up. As long as they're the same size around this outside diameter, then they'll work. This one obviously is off a board and in good shape, but normally right along here, there'll be a lot of cracks in that because it gets flexed over and over again with every brake application, and eventually the rubber kind of wears out and blows through and it gets a little hole in it, so it allows air to get from one side of this diaphragm to the other. And when it does that, it gets on this side of the chamber and comes out those little holes because that's all open through there. So that would be why you were changing out this chamber. Now the reason we did the vice grips, this is a piston right here that diaphragm sets against, and this piston is connected to that push rod that comes out the end here. You see the spring in behind here. If I don't put the vice grips on there, this moves out this way when I take it apart. So when I go to put this piece back on with my new diaphragm, it's going to hit way out here, and I'm going to have to force that and try to hold all that in place along with the diaphragm that I don't have in there right now. hold that together and get the band around there, the bolt started and everything with basically one hand, because one hand is holding all that spring tension. If I pull that out and lock it down, that moves this out of the way and I can just push it together, put the band on there, and it's a whole lot easier because the spring's not fighting you. Once it's all done, your band's on there and it's clamped down evenly. If it's the 2-bolt type, be sure it pulls down evenly and pulls into place, because you don't want it like hanging up and then coming loose later, or loosening up. So be sure you do that. There's a torque spec on those clamps, generally about 35 foot-pounds. So you would torque that down, not over tighten it where you break it, but not leave it loose. If you're doing this on the vehicle, I don't even unbolt this. The book says to unbolt the whole chamber and put it in a vise. It's really hard to get a hold of it because it's round, and the way you're going to take it apart, it's going to be very awkward. I leave it on the truck and just pull this back half off, put a new diaphragm on. I don't have to take the hose loose. The only thing I have to do is put a mark here and here somewhere where that I can line that back up when I put it together, and that way my hose runs at the right angle once it's reassembled. Since I didn't have to take this hose loose, I don't have to worry about creating a leak here, resealing it. I don't have to worry about damaging the hose. These little retainers up here get road salt, grime, and dirt all in them, so sometimes they fight you coming off because they try to strip out. So if I do this whole thing, or replace the diaphragm with this left on the truck, I don't have to mess with this, I don't have to mess with the hose, and to me it's just easier. Okay. So that pretty much wraps up that task sheet. Now later on when you're in class, we'll talk about this spring brake chamber. The front half of it works the same with the diaphragm and all that. The back half here has a spring in it that can kill you, so we do that in the shop. Once you're back from your distance learning, we'll learn how to work on this chamber safely, because this is very dangerous if you don't follow procedures. So don't ever work on this until you've been properly trained on how to work on the one on the back that actually applies the brakes for the parking brake, because this spring inside this thing can kill you. So it's very serious when you work on it.